Seems like it's been a long time since I've stood up here. I don't know if that's good or bad. Anyway, yesterday we found out that Ben, employer, got COVID, and so Ben had to go into hibernation for a little while and probably was checked, although he doesn't know yet whether he has it. And so that's what brought me here. Now, what I tried to do is tried to follow somewhat similar to his subject, but it may not be exactly, because I had to rely on notes that I've taken before, and it's just hard to come up something real fast, and I think most preachers know that. In Matthew chapter 15, which is, we finished the first 14 books in the little 2 books I put out. So I've been working on 15, and so I was reminded of this verse in Matthew 15, verses 8 and 9. It says, "This people honors me with their lips, but their heart is far from me. But in vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the precepts of men." Now the part of that jumped out to me with reference this evening is how far their lips and their hearts are apart. And that's what happens a lot of time in worship. Our lips and our hearts get apart from each other. And the theme was kind of doing the right things with the right reason, or some phraseology similar to that at least. So I thought I might first just think about some ways that I think are wrong motivations to serve God. And when I start into this list, the first thing you're going to think is, are you right or not? Because the first thing that I'm going to suggest is a wrong motive to serve God, to do His will, and whatever we do every day, is to treat it as repaying a debt. And so you might say, well, God owes me an awful big debt, But the problem with just looking at it as repaying a debt is it's a debt we can't repay. Now, if I go out and buy a house, buy a boat, buy a car, they look at me and say, well, you look like you're going to be able to make payments to us, and we make payments for a while. But this is different. The debt that we're trying to pay is unlimited grace. We can't afford that. I don't care how many billions and trillions and however much money you think you ever get, you're never going to be able to pay for that. It's just unpayable. And that's the problem with it, with grace. And that's the problem with looking at serving God as just repaying some, and honestly, He's done a lot for us, but we can't look at it just that way. In Romans chapter 4, Paul writes, verse 2, "For if Abraham was justified by works, he has something to boast about, but not before God. For what does Scripture say? Abraham believed God, and it was credited to him as righteousness." Just think about that. He believed in God, and he had a way to be righteous in God's sight. The very next word says, "Now to the one who works, his wage is not credited as a favor, but what is due." See, sometimes when we look at it as just repaying a debt, we're limited because we think, well, I only owe this much debt, and that's all I'm going to do. The problem is the debt we owe God is tremendously large, and it's gigantic, and there's no way we can ever even consider that. So that's one motivation by itself is the way I would define it. As repaying God back. Another motivation for service is just a duty. It's just a habit. And I agree. I've gotten in the habit of going to church here on Sunday morning for Bible class, and then for worship, and then on Sunday night, and then on Wednesday night, and we had the men's breakfast, and the ladies had their Bible class, which gratefully they've just restarted again. And those were all habits that we had to change a little bit, haven't we? And now we're still, thankfully, in the habit of coming here at least twice a week, and that's great. There was a experiment done years ago, and if you've ever read any psychology book, it's one of their introductory examples, but It's called Pavlov's dogs, and I don't know if I pronounced that right. But what they really did was they had these dogs that were hungry, and they were feeding them. But every time they fed them food, they rang a bell. And so the dogs got to associating ringing the bell with food's going to be here just real quick. And then they noticed that you could not put food there and there'd still be saliva would be coming up in the mouth because they think food's going to be there. In other words, they were taught a habit. And I hope that it is a habit for you to worship here regularly, to do good things and to be a good person and all that. I hope that's a habit. But I want it to be more than a habit. And that's motivation we might start with, but we need to go beyond that. Another reason sometimes we serve God, and I would just simply call this guilt. We all have a lot of guilt. All of us do things we are not proud of and we know we shouldn't do. And a really good example of that is in Matthew 27, verse 3 and 4, Judas. It says, "Then when Judas, who betrayed him, saw that he had been condemned, he felt remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders, saying, 'I have sinned by betraying innocent blood.' But they said, 'What is that to us? See that to yourself.'" It was good that he had remorse. It was good that he brought the money back. We can go into a bigger, deeper discussion as to why he didn't seem to think he was forgiven and all the issues related to that. But guilt is a good thing. It leads us in a right direction. But we need to have more than that. Just doing something because we feel guilty is not enough. And that's the point I'm trying to say. One other imperfect motivation, that's fear. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't have some fear, but that shouldn't be the only thing. I remember I was going to be baptized on a Sunday morning. I was 14, I think, at the time, and I was kind of nervous walking. That's a big, long aisle, And so I just couldn't get myself to do that. But I was scared to death the whole Sunday afternoon, and I responded on Sunday night. So fear is not a bad thing, but fear by itself is incomplete. A small verse from Matthew 25, verse 41. "Then he will say to those who are on his left, 'Depart from me, the accursed ones, into eternal fire, which have been prepared for the devil and his angels. For I was hungry, and he gave me nothing to eat. I was thirsty, he gave me nothing to drink. I was a stranger, you did not invite me, and naked, you did not clothe me, sick and in prison, you did not visit me.' And they will answer, 'Lord, when did we see you this way?'" But the point I'm trying to get from that verse is they had fear for not doing the right thing. And we ought to have some fear. I'm not going to argue that at all, but I hope there's more to that. We've talked about some motivations to serve. We've talked about the motivation, the idea of simply repaying a debt for the great things God's done for us. We've talked about the idea of it just being a duty or a habit that we get into, and it is a good habit to get into. We've talked about guilt and having guilt for something that we've done, and we've talked about fear. But let me suggest that the most perfect reason to serve God is because you love him. You see, when you love somebody, even if we compare it to love here on this earth, there's no limit to what we're going to do for that person because we love them. And so that's the point that we're trying to make, that the only true motivation that we ought to have, that the overall thing, is because we love somebody. Deep love leads us to be faithful. It leads us, certainly, to feel guilty when we're sinning. It leads us to feel duty to do things that help people into God. It leads us to feel fear when we would disobey God. And it leads us to feel that we should help God when he's done so much for us. But the primary basis for that should be our love for God, which should be something that grows and grows. The word agape, which is the word for love in the Greek New Testament, is used most in 1 John chapter 4. And it's almost a whole chapter. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I want to read parts of it. This is in 1 John chapter 4. We're in verse 7. It says, "Beloved, let us love one another, for love is from God. And everyone who loves is born of God and knows God." Now think about what those mean, to be born of God and to know God. Verse 8, "The one who does not love does not know God." That's a statement. And then it says, "God is love." Verse 9, "For this the love of God was manifested in us, that God sent his Son, his only begotten Son, into the world, that we might live through him. In this is love, not that we love God, but that he loved us and sent his Son to be the propitiation for our sins." What happens so many times is we define love based on what we see around us. We don't define it based on what we read about in the Bible. That's why we need to be in the Bible a whole lot, in the New Testament especially, learning about his love and his great compassion. Then notice verse 11, and that's kind of the theme of what I've been trying to suggest. Beloved, if God so loved us, we ought to love one another. Every time that you're confronted with somebody who is hard to love, and there are a lot of people in this world like that, some that you know personally, some you see on TV or hear on the radio or whatever, just remember the love that God has for you. And look down inside yourself and see the mistakes and the problems that you deal with every day as you're trying to do right and do good. And God loves you. He's going to love them too. And we ought to love them too. Verse 18 of 1 John 4, "There is no fear in love, but perfect love casts out fear, because fear involves punishment. And the one who fears is not perfected in love. We love because he first loved us." But then I want us to go beyond that. You know, it's real easy to talk about love. That's a nice word, and it means an awful lot of different, very, very good things. But I want us to talk about being a servant, because that's what love really is. We become a group of servants. I found this article some years ago, and evidently it's true. I'm going to assume it's true. It was read in some magazine. But anyway, they were doing an experiment, and they took 8 mouse, or mices. What's the plural for that? I'm not sure. Anyway, they got 8 of them together, and they put them and formed a little colony. Now, what happens when you have 8? Well, a couple of them get together, and you get a couple more. Anyway, this colony grew to 2,200 mouses, or mices. And they're providing all the food that they need, all the water. They're given everything they need, this group of whatever they're called. And so you've got a colony of them, and here's what happened, and this is what's interesting. The males who were normally protected the colony stopped protecting them so much. I guess because they were already protected. I don't know. It said the females stopped being very good at bringing up their young, and they forced their young out early. It said the young, I guess that's male and female, grew self-indulgent with no assertiveness. It says courting and dating ceases, and evidently in a mouse, that's a very weird kind of thing. But anyway, after 5 years, all of them died. And so you think about what happened there. What happened there in real sense was the servants in that community stopped being servants. The male protecting, the females as they raised the kids, it was society without servants. Have you ever thought about that's what it sometimes appears our society is heading toward? Everybody is wanting all the things they want. Man wants somebody else to give it to them and to watch over them and make sure they get it and all that to get what their right is. But we need a society where people are servants of other people and help people, and they don't just, and I think God realizes this, And if you really think about it, that's one of the reasons the church was put together and arranged so that we could be a glue to hold society together. If you go to Matthew chapter 20, there's a couple illustrations in there that I think emphasize this. Now, the first one's the illustration of the guy that's they're in the middle of the court there and they want to work. So the guy comes along and he says, I have some work for you to do. Come home and do the work. He comes back on the 3rd hour and gets some more people. Comes back at the 6th hour, which is noon, gets another one. Gets some more. At the 9th hour, he gets some. At the 11th hour, which is 5 o'clock, an hour before quitting time, he gets some more. And then he decides to pay him. And he ended up paying all of them a denarius. And the people got upset about that because they thought they were owed more. And God was paying the same thing for us. And there's a lot of illustrations and points he's trying to make, besides the fact that if you become a Christian an hour before the second coming, you're still going to heaven, as opposed to someone who's lived as a Christian for 67 years. And the reason I bring that up, Mrs. Bartlett called me a few days ago and was asking me, she had just found out about my little heart issues that I've had, and was asking me about that. And she said that in 8 days, which may have already reached here by now, that they would have been married 67 years. And I told her, I said, I haven't even lived 67 years. So the point I'm trying to say here is that we need servants that will work for what God gives them, no matter what. Later on, right after that, you have the mother of the sons of Zebedee asking for an extra request. This is in verse 20. The mother of sons of Zebedee came to Jesus with her sons, bowing down, making a request of him. And he said to her, "What do you wish?" And she said, "Command that in your kingdom these 2 sons of mine may sit, one on your right, one on the left." And Jesus answered, "You do not know what you're asking. You're able to drink the cup that I'm able to drink." And he goes on and says, sure I will. And then he says, well, I can't honor that request. Everybody doesn't want to be a servant. They want to be in charge of everything. And I know some of the different gospel accounts, sometimes it says the sons asked, sometimes it says the mother asked. Probably in real terms, both of them asked. And again, we need servants. We don't need leaders. Now, if you were going to ask for a job, who wants to be head of the United States? Now, here we go. I don't want it. But there probably would be hundreds of thousands of people that would say, yeah, if you gave me control over that, I could just solve all the problems that everybody has. Then you ask them again, who wants to be a servant to the people in America and help people who really, really need help? You won't get near as many, at least not vigorously, to agree to that. In verse 24, same chapter in Matthew 20, we've got the other apostles find out about this. And hearing this, the 10 became indignant with the 2 brothers, but Jesus called them to himself and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great men exercise authority to them, and it is no way among you that whoever wishes to become great among you shall become your servant. But whoever wishes to become first among you must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man will not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life for many." What we need in this world are people that have committed themselves to serving God, and they serve God because they love God, and because they love God, they serve the people around them and enrich the world in which they have. And also bring up many people in their families that also in like manner are slaves and servants. So let's not serve God simply out of the idea of repaying a debt, or simply because it's a duty, or simply because we feel guilty, or simply because we fear. Let's serve him mainly because we love him and we realize that he's done so much for us, and there's absolutely no way that we can ever even get the tiniest amount paid back. It's just totally impossible. So as we're servants, I hope you'll keep that in mind. The idea of this series was kind of good habits for a servant of God, and I hope that this ends it out pretty well. But hope that you'll look at your life, as you always, I'm sure, have been, as we've been thinking about these things. And if we can help you anyway, we certainly will. And I almost thought I was going to do what I do at Hattieville, and that is everybody stand up. But we won't do that. Stay seated, and one of the elders will be to you if we can help you in any way. We ask you to come while we stand and while we sing this song.